teachings, if you will, of meditation that I got put it that an ordinary person looks at a white snow mountain through a pair of yellow tinted glass, and the white snow looks yellow. And it doesn't matter how much that person looks for yellow snow, they will actually never find yellow snow. It comes down to how one perceives things is what determines how one experiences life in general. And that's of course a main subject of all the traditions coming out of India, and Buddhism being a very important one of those. I think Buddha spoke about it in two ways. One is from point of view of the self. And there, rather than use the word self, he used the word anatma, non-self. Because when we talk about, we go back to the image of the snow, yellow snow, seen through yellow glasses, or blue snow seen through blue sunglasses. In fact, everything one sees gets distorted by that tinted glass. So in that same way, when one doesn't understand the nature of the self, in other words, when one thinks of oneself as sort of this blue being, or this yellow being, or this green being, depending on one's glasses, everything else is recontextualized to that fictional creation. So almost all of the Buddhist training, and particularly in Tantra, comes down to that basic theme, that our understanding of the nature of self is mistaken. When understanding of nature of self is mistaken, the understanding of the nature of the other is mistaken, the other person. And when understanding of nature of self and other are both mistaken, the interaction between self and others becomes mistaken. So in Indian literature, that's often called as Mahavidya, or the great not knowing. Sometimes translated as ignorance, but in English ignorance more means something to do with uneducated peoples from places with big mountains and poor schools. But this Mahavidya, or the great unknowing, or the great not knowing, comes down to we don't understand the nature of self. As we don't understand the nature of self, basically everything we understand is misconstructed. When we don't understand the nature of self, nobody's comfortable with just not knowing anything. So they create a false self. They create a false identity. What do they create that on? Well, based on what in Buddhist language they call the five skandhas, based on the things the objects of the five senses, our experiences of the objects of the five senses, based on the way we give an emotional tone to everything, our feelings, I like this, I don't like that, I like this, I don't like that, based on our perceptions or belief systems, based on our activities and habits, like I'm a banker, I'm a writer, I'm a carpenter, or simply based on a quality of mind. I'm a compassionate person, I'm an angersome person. We develop a sense of a fixed self based on that. And because that self is purely created by the conceptual mind, it therefore doesn't really harmonize with the totality of being, the totality of being. A long time in Atlanta, when I went back to America in the end of the 80s, I got a job in Atlanta bringing over an art exhibit of Tibetan art, Buddhist art connected to the Dalai Lama for the Summer Olympics of '96. And so we live right next to Alabama, another the great state of Alabama, as it's written on the sign as you enter the country. They have a wonderful expression there, from the get-go. So from the get-go, in the Buddhist tradition, essentially, all effort comes at observing or noticing how our sense of self colors and contextualizes everything in our experience. And usually that's done in two basic ways. One is a sutra, what in Indian tradition they call the sutra way, or the public common way, which means a way based on common intelligence, where we simply try to get a sense of who do I think I am? Who do I think I am? Who is Glenn? Who is Grace? Who is Degi? Who is Wanhee? One tries to create a sense in one's mind, and then look within oneself for that, what represents that. So often they do that by first in 4 steps. Firstly, you generate a very strong sense, who do I think I am? Ask, who am I? Who am I? The second Dalai Lama writes in a poem, and then hold to that thought like a fish on a hook. So you follow it, and you sweep through these so-called 5 skandhas. In other words, your sense of the world is a sensory phenomena, and everything you see, smell, taste, touch, hear. What in the sense of the world fits that who am I? And then feeling response, things you like, dislike. How accurate is that really? And then thoughts, beliefs, how accurate is that? And habits and activities. How much does that really embody the totality of your sense of being? And finally, some quality of consciousness. So it's called emptiness meditation because when you look for it, the more you look, the less you find. Like you think Glenn the banker. And then you look at yourself as Glenn the banker. But banking is really a very small part of your life, isn't it? There's also Glenn the walker who takes walks, Glenn the breather, Glenn the bather who takes baths, Glenn the whatever are your other roles in life. We notice that this sense of self based merely on that doesn't fit to very much. So in the end, you basically cruise through the 5 skandhas with that sense of self. As you do so, that sense of self basically fades. It loses a little bit of strength. And as you do that continually, it's always like reevaluating the sense of self, reevaluating the sense of who am I, dissolving the false self, allowing the sense of self to expand to bigger and bigger horizons. Eventually that word emptiness comes up, shunya or shunyata, often symbolized in Asia by the circle. Because it seems like things have boundaries, but a circle has no beginning and no end. All things appear to have an actual findable nature, but nothing has a findable nature. Like if we say my body, it seems like there's a place my body starts and a place my body ends. But it's purely a trick of the mind, isn't it? I breathe in air and there's no point in which we say this air is Glenn. It's not Glenn hair. The air is not Glenn hair. Or if I drink water or tea, we don't say this is Glenn. But then when we drink it, it's Glenn. If we notice with all things, that things appear in one way, but are completely different. They're emptiness. They're empty of existing in the way of their appearance. So the general approach to studying the self or observing the self follows that method, you could say. Who am I? Getting a sense of it. Looking, not finding, releasing. Then coming to terms with a little bit of a deeper sense of who am I. Looking, not finding, releasing. And doing that in a repeated way, the self expands, expands, and sense of self expands, expands, until emptiness. Emptiness here having a sense of infinity. In other words, no boundary. So the sort of the Sutra approach goes like that. Tantric Buddhism takes a kind of a proactive sense, a more proactive approach. I don't have a clue who I am. So why should I think of myself as Chris from Newfoundland? I mean, why I can give myself any self-identity I like, because my identity is just based on very little fragments of biographical documentation. In reality, I can connect my sense of self to anything, can't I? I mean, I'm breathing in dust from the most distant planet and the most distant star. Why don't I call myself Star Child? Where are you from? Well, I'm from, we can basically, the sense of self becomes infinite, doesn't it? We just base that sense of self on very small fragments of biographical information, based on our ancestry, based on our place of birth, based on our education, and so on and so forth. So Tantra takes a very proactive approach, and rather than that simply says, I'm great. Who are you? Great. Who are you? Great. Who are you? Great. Relating to all beings simply on the basis of their universality. That is, all beings, of course, the universe takes a specific look coming through a specific prism. But that light going through that prism comes from the totality of the universe, something like that. So Tantra takes that more sort of proactive way of doing it. A simple tantric meditation that one would do would be, say, to sit for a few moments. You generate a sense of your body as being pure light and pure energy. Then you dissolve the whole universe into your body, and your whole body from the head down and feet up into the heart, into infinite radiance. And you just come to terms with the fact that everything you experience in the universe is actually only experienced at the core of your being. That's just something experienced at the core of your being. We all think we know something about the outside world, but how do we know anything about the outside world? Only through electromagnetic signals passing through our brain, isn't it? Which generates a particular kind of an electrical impulse, which directs a particular kind of sense of smell, taste, touch, or vision. So in reality, the world we experience is completely our personalized world. There's nothing non-personalized about anything we experience. In other words, everything external is really, as far as we're concerned, an internal phenomenon. The great king of mountains is just for me, is just something in my own mind. So Tantra takes that sort of proactive approach to things. And secondly, looks at the point of view of how our state of consciousness completely impacts the way we experience the outer world. And so very dramatically takes charge of state of consciousness. In the Tibetan world and Mongolian world, both of these traditions were sort of combined as a preliminary practice in something known as the 7-point mind training. And so I noticed on the website that I was going to say something about that today.